Let's talk, however, this hour about a comment made by the morning co-host on the CBS morning show, Gayle King, about not seeing very many people of color during the Trump inauguration. Number 9.
I have to say, I'm looking at this crowd. I do not see many people of color. Does anybody else besides me observe that? I'm fascinated by why that is.
On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the most notable and one of the most high-ranking is Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, first black woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, notably appointed by Joe Biden as he wanted to follow in the footsteps of Jimmy Carter and appointing a number of women and black women to the federal judgeships.
General Brown, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is probably there. In fact, that might be the side of his head. No, because he's, well, I can't tell what uniform that is. I can't tell from this. But he was undoubtedly there.
Yeah, I saw Jim Clyburn. I saw him.
Unbelievable. I'm walking here. I didn't see very many people. You guys notice that too? What are they going to say? Gee, no, Gayle. We don't really care. And is that really the issue? We've got China on the move. We've got 10 to 12 million illegal aliens in the country. We have the country infused with DEI, so that people are being promoted based on color of skin rather than merit. We had record inflation, higher than any time in the last 40 years. Gas prices 50% higher. But hey, I don't see very many people of color. Really? And then there's a comment made by Sonny Hostins, who commented on the people of color who were there, number 39.
Welcome back. So, before the commercial, we were talking about a felon pardoning other felons. Sonny?
Yeah, I just wanted to just put a quick button on it because I was not offended by Biden pardoning his family because I think, just like Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you or tells you who they are, believe them the first time.
Right.
We've already had a Trump presidency. We know that this administration is a vengeful one. We know this is a vengeful man. And if I can protect me and mine, I would do that. And so I think we need to show Joe Biden some grace. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about that a lot of people are talking about is that there are these black performers. You mentioned that there were entertainers at the inauguration. There are these black performers that were performing for Snoop Dogg, Nelly, a couple of others. And I saw Keith Boykin, a friend of mine, say something that I thought was really important, and I wanted to play that clip.
If you look at Donald Trump, the man who would refuse to rent to black people in the 1970s, who tried to lead a lynch mob against 5 black and brown kids in the 1980s for the Central Park case, who refused to allow black casino workers to have a prominent place in his casinos in Atlantic City in the 1990s, who spent 5.5 years lying about Barack Obama's birth certificate in the 2000s, who came into office and then attacked black people like Colin Kaepernick, who attacked Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss for simply doing their jobs as Fulton County election workers. You dishonor those people when you go and perform for this man who has done nothing but dishonor black people.
Even though I didn't watch any of the balls or anything, I think what Keith said is so important for us to remember, that this is who Donald Trump is.
Where do you start? Let me start with this. If you support Donald Trump and you're black, vote for Donald Trump and you're black, many people would perceive you to be a sellout. If you aren't there, people like Gayle King will wonder, why aren't there more black people there? So you can't win. Remember when Condoleezza Rice was the National Security Advisor and Colin Powell was the Secretary of State? What did Harry Belafonte say? Number 46.
My comments about General Colin Powell is really not a personal confrontation. Black Americans and many peoples of color have always taken great pride in what those of us who come from a history of oppression have achieved. And when an individual breaks through and comes into the place where decisions are made that can make a difference, we then have high expectations. Once that is rejected by those who have acquired this position, we may sit in quiet disappointment. But when the person who achieves that distinction then puts him or herself in the service of our oppression and those who create new ways in which to oppress us, that is morally unacceptable. And that is my argument with General Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice.
Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell created new ways of oppressing us. And here's what Harry Belafonte had said specifically about Colin Powell. Quote, "There were those slaves who lived on the plantation, and there were those slaves that lived in the house. You got the privilege of living in the house if you served the master exactly the way the master intended to have you serve him. Colin Powell's committed to come into the house of the master." Close quote. I should note that Colin Powell voted twice for Barack Obama, but I guess he didn't know that was going to happen at the time. Now, regarding Keith Boykin, the person that was played by Sonny Hostin, he said Donald Trump refused to rent to people in the 1980s. He's referring to a consent decree that the Trump organization entered into for allegedly refusing to rent to qualified would-be renters who were black and brown. He admitted no wrongdoing, promised to, going forward, to add and put ads in Hispanic and black publications. In 1974, Chuck Schumer, just out of Harvard Law, was running for state assembly and went to a meeting of racist neighbors in an area of New York called Flatbush. The neighbors were concerned that there was a couple of apartment buildings full of black people. Now, the blacks weren't causing any problems. They weren't committing any crimes. In fact, they were playing basketball with the other people in the neighborhood. But the neighbors wanted them out. And Chuck Schumer promised them, if they voted for him, he would introduce a bill to use money that was set aside for refurbishing areas in certain distressed locations. And those buildings would then be renovated, but they'd be renovated to the point where they would be so expensive that the blacks who had to relocate while their renovation project was going on and they'd had right of first refusal to come back wouldn't be able to come back. Chuck Schumer got elected and did just that. Those buildings were renovated. What he didn't appreciate was the willingness of blacks to raise the money to come back, and they did. But he attempted to do so. How do I know this? A guy named Jay Homnick wrote a piece about this. I've interviewed him a couple times over the years, and nobody seems to care. Now, this took place around the same time that the Trump organization entered into the consent decree. Now, if that makes you a racist for what Donald Trump did allegedly 50 years ago, then Chuck Schumer's a racist. Nobody talks about it. Central Park 5, they were, quote-unquote, exonerated. One problem is they actually committed the crime. They were involved in the rape of the Central Park jogger. How do I know this? I interviewed the lead detective, who happened to be a black person. Ken Burns did not, even though he did a documentary claiming that they were innocent. Ava DuVernay did not, even though she did a film claiming they were innocent. He said they were not innocent. And I was the only one who was not sued. And the reason I was not sued is because I'm black, and therefore the argument that racist cops unfairly rounded these boys up couldn't be used against me. I did a documentary called The Truth About the Central Park 5. You can find it on YouTube. And you watch that documentary and you tell me those boys did not do this. And finally, regarding Donald Trump's assertion that Barack Obama was not born here, you're right. He hired a bunch of people to track down, and it turned out he had a press conference and said he was wrong. But you know who started the whole birther controversy? Hillary Clinton. There's a book called Game Change about the 2008 campaign, written by Mark Halperin and John Heilman, and they said it was a Hillary campaign that started the rumor that Barack Obama was not born in America. And a guy named James Asher, who worked for the McClatchy newspaper, he was the Washington, D.C. bureau chief, was approached by Sidney Blumenthal, a top aide to Hillary Clinton, and he told Asher that Obama was not born here. And Asher put on a team to look into it, found out it wasn't true, but it started with Hillary Clinton. That makes her a racist, doesn't it? Reminds me of the time the Dodgers were in the World Series and Mookie Betts did a game-winning run. He was interviewed afterwards. And one of the hosts said, happened to be black, you know, Mook, everybody's talking about it. When did you realize that you were the only African-American in the World Series? And Mookie Betts said, right now. Everybody's talking about it, said Harold Reynolds. When did you realize it? No, everybody's not talking about it. You are. That's why it was interesting when Gayle King said, anybody else ever notice it? No, Gayle, just you. But they weren't going to say it. Really? Why is that relevant?
When you get to the World Series, everything's magnified. And one of the things that everybody's talking about across the country, you're the only African-American player in the World Series. So when did you learn that, and what are your thoughts when you think about that?
Learned it just now.
Okay. Now, how many people do you think in America were watching the inauguration, the celebration, and said to themselves, I'm not seeing very many people of color? And how often do you watch MSNBC, if you ever do, or The View, if you ever do, and hear Donald Trump being referred to as a racist? So if Donald Trump's being referred to as a racist, and there are a lot of black people there, that means there are a lot of black people there who are perfectly okay with Donald Trump being a racist. And then you call them sellouts. So you cannot win. Meanwhile, the big picture is completely ignored. Do you think the number one problem facing the black community is a lack of people of color at Donald Trump's inauguration? As opposed to, I don't know, the epidemic of fatherlessness? Where, as I said many times, 70% of blacks enter the world without a father in the home, married to the mother, meaning your chances of being poor, dropping out, going to jail are increased substantially. Has Gayle King ever talked about the fact that 85% of black 8th graders can neither read nor do math at grade level? And that the Democrat Party, the party I'm sure she supports, opposes school choice, which would give black urban kids and Hispanic urban kids a better chance of graduating with the ability to actually read, write, and compute at grade level. Here Donald Trump is supporting school choice. Here Donald Trump is pro-family guy. Here Donald Trump is stopping illegal immigration. What does that have to do with black people and brown people? The people that are most hurt by illegal aliens in terms of economics are black and brown people living in the inner city where many of the illegal aliens end up living and working. And the aliens compete against black and brown workers with high school or less education, causing downward pressure on the wages of black and brown people to the tune of almost $1,800 a year. Biden allowed in between 12 and 14 million illegal aliens who will disproportionately hurt the very black and brown people that Gayle apparently is concerned about. Donald Trump, best economy ever for black people. Donald Trump, inflation negligible. Donald Trump, gas prices 50% lower than what they are right now. Do you know who disproportionately benefits from lower prices? People who are on the lower income levels, many of whom are the very black and brown people that Gayle King purports to care about. But let's talk about how many black faces aren't there at Donald Trump's inauguration. Are you kidding me? Donald Trump got a higher percentage of black vote than any Republican in several election cycles. Does that matter? Around 20-25% of black males voted for him. Substantial increase over even 4 years ago. Does that matter to Gayle King? How many black people are at the inauguration? I'm looking around, I don't see any. And then the black performers get trashed for performing? So do you want them there or not? Black performers are performing for somebody who's a racist, for somebody who refused to rent to black people, for somebody who said that Central Park 5 were guilty, for somebody who said that Barack Obama was not born here. You know who said the Central Park 5 were guilty? The lead investigator, who's black. Again, I interviewed him. And notice nobody seems to hold Hillary responsible for birtherism when she is the mother of birtherism. What phonies. And then they embraced Chuck Schumer, and I've said this over and over and over again. 1974, he introduced a bill in the legislature in New York to renovate a couple of buildings in a Flatbush area of New York so that the tenants of those buildings, who were primarily black, had to relocate while the buildings were being renovated. And the hope was they'd be renovated to the point where the blacks would not be able to return, or they would be where they were and would be happy where they were, and they would not come back. That was the scheme. Didn't work, but he tried it. And the guy who said this was a guy named Jay Homnick. He wrote about it in a magazine called The American Spectator. It was called Race to the Top. I've interviewed him at least 2 or 3 times over the last 10, 15 years. Nobody gives a rip. Such incredible hypocrisy. By the way, I'm watching a lot of local coverage about the fires. Mr. McConnell, I don't know if you noticed this, but most of the anchors are female. Often it's 2 females, and they cut away to somebody who's doing a stand-up at the scene. Female. I would say about 90%, maybe 80% of the local reporters doing weather and traffic and in studio and on the scene are females. Should I be upset about that, Gayle King? I've noticed that there seems to be a dearth of men in morning television. Should that be something that I should be concerned about? Really? Honestly. Have you guys noticed that? I don't see very many people of color. Thanks for watching these clips from The Larry Elder Show. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment. More thought-provoking discussions are just a click away, so stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.